So my name is Jeffrey Micher. I'm a linguist, a polyglot, language enthusiast, and I've been learning Manx for the last year, and I'm very excited to talk to you about it today. So my talk will proceed as following. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about language revival, and we're going to look at a couple of different languages that have been revived so that we have a context for comparing how well the Manx language revival has been. After that, I'll talk specifically about the Manx language revival, and then part 3, which is sort of my favorite part, talking about interesting grammatical features of Manx that I've learned about over the last year. And then in the end, if we have time, hopefully we'll play a game with Manx-English cognates where you get to try to recognize the cognates between Manx and English. If you want to go now to kahoot.it on your phone, so you have your browser ready, if you want to join the game at that point, we're going to be moving pretty quickly through it. So why don't we just get to it? Okay, so we have to talk about Manx in the context of language revival because Manx is a language that has been revived. And what does that mean? Well, language revival or revitalization or reversing language shift is an attempt to halt or reverse the decline of a language or to revive an extinct one. The UN estimates that there are about half of the languages of the world, which is about 3,500, with less than 10,000 speakers, and another quarter of those languages have less than 1,000 speakers. And so unless there are some efforts to maintain them over the next 100 years, most of these will become extinct. So what we're going to do in this first part of the talk is we're going to look at a couple of language revitalization efforts, and we'll highlight some of the things that made them successful so that we can compare them to what happened with Manx. Note, this is not necessarily a representative sample. This is just some of the languages that I thought were important or that were related to Manx or that were interesting. And it gives us a sample of the different types of things that happen with languages when they are revived. Okay, so Hebrew. I found this interesting quote on the internet. Hebrew is the only language having no native speakers to subsequently having several millions of native speakers. And that's just absolutely quite remarkable. If any language gets the highest marks for language revival, Hebrew is A+++. There's no other language that's been like this. A little bit of the history. Hebrew existed as a native language in the form of Mishnaic Hebrew, which ceased to be spoken as a mother tongue in the 2nd century. It, however, continued as a language of religious expression and ethnic identity, and it was used by the Jewish community with different colloquial languages to communicate with each other across Europe and the Near East since the Middle Ages. It continued to be used as a lingua franca for Jews arriving in what is now Israel in the first half of the 20th century. And the concept of its revival was specifically started by a man named Eliezer ben Yehuda, who created the Ben Yehuda Dictionary in 1908. So that's kind of a brief history of the revival of Hebrew. After we go through these 3 case studies, then I'm going to make a chart comparing the 3 of them. Next, we move on to Hawaiian. Hawaiian was an oral language prior to the arrival of missionaries in Hawaii in 1820, who then developed a written form for the Bible translation purposes. By 1834, because of this, an estimated 90% of the speakers were literate. However, in 1896, a law required that only English be used in all the schools, and this really accelerated the decline of Hawaiian. Another thing that accelerated the decline was that native Hawaiian speakers progressively became outnumbered by immigrants arriving in Hawaii who would learn English as the dominant language, and it was more important. And also native Hawaiians intermarried a lot with the immigrants and other English-speaking peoples, and so in those families, English just became the dominant language. It outranked the low-prestige Hawaiian language. However, in 1949, the Hawaiian government, this is probably the beginning of the revival of Hawaiian, the government commissioned a new dictionary, which was completed in 1957. There was a Hawaiian Renaissance in the 1970s, in which there was a renaissance of resurgence of Hawaiian cultural identity, drawing upon traditional Kanaka Maoli culture rather than what, this sort of touristy kind of Hawaiian hula dress, culture. By 1978, the Hawaiian language was reestablished as an official state language in the state of Hawaii. And in 1984, the Ahapuna Leo, which was a privately funded school, Hawaiian preschool, invited native Hawaiian speakers to speak to children and thus hope to carry on the language. There have always been communities of speakers. There was one community of speakers which continues to this day on the island of Ni'ihau. And so the numbers today, there's about 24,000 speakers of Hawaiian worldwide. 2,000 of those are considered to be native from these communities. And then the third example we're looking at is Cornish. Cornish is a Celtic language that's spoken in Cornwall, which is southwest tip of England. The Act of Uniformity in 1549 made the English Book of Common Prayer as the sole legal form of worship in England, leading to the Prayer Book Rebellion, in which 4,000 people who protested against the imposition of an English prayer book were massacred by Edward VI's army. Cornish, for many, many years, had no established written conventions, and there was no Bible in Cornish. Apparently, the last native monolingual speaker, Dolly Pentriath, and there's a picture of her, she died in 1777. And so Cornish really was quite extinct, even though people had still carried on with literature, interest in Cornish. It really wasn't a spoken language for the past 200 years. As a result, there are no audio recordings because the native speakers died out before we had that technology available to us. Right, so another interesting thing that I learned about Cornish was as the people started getting interested in reviving it, there were these rivals between the people who were writing the grammar books and creating the system of writing. There were like a handful of them. There was Unified Cornish, Common Cornish, Modern Cornish, Revivally Cornish, Unified Cornish again. And so it caused a lot of chaos in the revival efforts. But finally, in 2008, a standard written form of Cornish was established, which then was able to help regenerate the revival efforts. I had some correspondence with a speaker who's been learning Cornish for decades. And he told me there were anywhere between 500 to 3,000 speakers of Cornish. These numbers are really hard to compute because it's hard to know if someone reports in a census, yes, I speak Cornish. Like, well, what does that mean? Can you read it? Can you actually speak it? Do you use it every day? Do you see the road signs and you know what they mean? My informant told me that more people are fluent in writing rather than speaking, which makes sense. But there is local government support. There's a language office. They give money for a radio program, and they create these modules for primary schools called Go Cornish. There is bilingual signage now on buses and road signs. But he said that the biggest challenge is getting people together to actually practice speaking the language. Okay, so we've seen 3 instances of language revival. And here's just a table which kind of compares some of the factors that influence them. I think probably the most important factors, as I see it, are identity. I think people need to identify with the language in order for the language revival to be successful, right? Because if nobody cares about it, if people don't feel that it's part of themselves or who they want to be, that's going to hamper the revival effort, right? In each of these languages, we've seen that. And also, what's also very important is government support. So in each of these languages, obviously, Hebrew became the language of a nation, but the Hawaiian had government support and the Cornish as well. And finally, I think the school, putting a language program in schools for children is really, really important, and that really helps the success of a language revival.
What is geography?
Well, that I was just thinking more about. So Hawaii is isolated, right? And so Cornish is kind of isolated, but it's sort of part of the UK. So it's not like there's a physical water barrier separating. Hebrew, it's I just said put an N for that category because Hebrew is spoken all over the world, really. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so what is Manx? Now, the topic of today's talk. This is a Manx cat. You may have heard of Manx cats, right? They're these cats, they don't have tails. That's what some people associate when they hear of Manx. I told a friend of mine, I said, oh, I'm so excited, I'm learning the Manx language. And he said, why? So you can talk to cats? Right, so, but that's just a little humor inserted in there. Here's my multilingual slide. I spent half an hour last night pulling out all the names for Manx in various languages, so you might recognize your language. I didn't get every language. It would have taken me hours to get a lot more. Right, so Manx is one of the 6 existing Celtic languages in the world. If you know about Celtic languages, you know that they covered all of Europe for a long time, and then the Romans came in and intermarried with them, and everybody started to speak Latin, and then the Anglo-Saxons moved into Britain, and everybody there was speaking English, and gradually the Celtic languages died out, and the ones that are left got pushed way up into the northwest of the British Isles. So Manx is very closely related to Modern Irish and Scottish Gaelic. All of these descended from Middle Irish, and then the other 3 existing Celtic languages are Breton, Cornish, and Welsh, and they are in their own sort of branch of the language. I'm not sure, but if you could hold off the questions until the end, we can talk about them then. Right, so Manx is spoken on the Isle of Man, which is located in the Irish Sea between the United Kingdom and Ireland. The population is about 85,000 as of this statistic that I found from 2020. But why is Manx endangered? Well, the last native speaker died in 1974, and UNESCO subsequently declared it extinct in 2000. So here's a little video that tells a little bit about that. Can we get sound? Can we get the sound on the video?
You've just heard the recording of the last ever Manx native speaker. His name was Nen Madrell. He died in 1974, and with him, so did the Manx Gaelic language. At least, that's what UNESCO thought before it made a comeback. Okay, sorry that got cut off. It was hard to do the video cuts clearly, but yeah, you got to hear a little bit of one of the last native speaker, or the last native speaker speaking Manx. There we go. So Manx, as I said, descended from Middle Irish,
It became distinct from Irish and Scottish Gaelic around the 1200s. The earliest Manx texts were written in, were religious, and there's quite a lot of them, and then there was secular literature that came afterwards. But there is a Manx corpus available online if you're curious. You can search for words. It provides, it's fairly extensive. It's got a lot of the classical literature of Manx with translations into English. But by the late 18th century, almost every school on the Isle of Man was teaching English. I did not determine if that was legally mandated or not. That's a question I still have to figure out. But as a result, it ceased to be a community language by the late 19th century, and it was just considered as a language of ignorance and poverty, and like, who would want to learn that? You learn English because you'll have a better life. I actually found this quote, which is an old Manx saying, "Chadinu cosni ping leis elk," which means you will not earn a penny with Manx. That was sort of the attitude of people, and why Manx really declined a lot. However, there was an effort to revive it, and in 1899, the Manx Language Society was established, and their goal was to promote the language. There were significant efforts made in the middle of the 20th century to record the speakers, the last native speakers, before they all died out. Without these, we would not know really how Manx truly was spoken, how it sounded. So that was really, really important, I think. One interesting fact, though, that the laws of the Island of Man are read out loud every year in a festival on Tynwald Hill, and this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there is a bit of a continuity of Manx, and that helps to adds to the revival, I think. Then there was, in the 1990s, there was a preschool sort of daycare that was founded called Muingervega, and Posancloy means play group, where parents would take their children to every day, and the children would be, the very small children would be exposed to Manx. So they'd start learning how to say words in Manx, singing, playing games using Manx. And then in 2001, a elementary school opened, and it was a monolingual Manx elementary school. So all subjects are taught only in Manx at this school. And I've got a little video about that here.
Welcome to the Bunschool Gilga. My name's Julie Matthews and I'm the head teacher here.
This is the only primary school in the world where children are taught all of their lessons in Manx Gaelic.
We started just over 20 years ago, actually in a school in Douglas with 9 pupils. And 20 years later, we've got 54 pupils in the school and hopefully growing for the next few years. It's great that the children are wanting to learn Manx. They want as much as their parents to learn Manx. Actually, it's a choice that they've made as well very often. And they sort of bring along a lot of adults with them. So I think because of that, the children have sort of led the way to get many more speakers.
If somebody is from here and then they would go to move somewhere else, they would speak Manx and let everybody else know that it's a language.
What's your favourite thing about speaking Manx?
That it's like our secret language, so if we're doing a sport or in a competition, we can talk to each other in Manx and no one else will hear our plan.
Every week we have 2 children that are picked because they've been trying really hard with speaking Manx in the playground, and they go to Greens, the cafe next door, and they join in with a group of adult speakers there.
Inside that I'll start doing cognates things.
Oh, it's lovely. We look forward to seeing them because it's a different 2 each week. And it just brings a lot of energy to our group, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, are they good listeners?
Yes, except I think, like I just said, I think it may be a bit hard for them if we say talk too fast or they're too, yeah. Although they are good listeners. They try to understand.
When you realise we shall tag it, fashion motion and cream.
While we're here, we asked the children to teach us a couple of words.
Fastamai is good afternoon,
So, is it fastamai?
and so faster is afternoon, and Mara is morning.
Perfect. Okay.
This is, I don't understand. Hanel me tickle.
And then mythical. Well, I guess I'll use that one.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of some of the activities that go on in the school. Like I said, in 2009, UNESCO declared that Manx was extinct. At that point, the children at the school were like, what? It's not extinct. We're like speaking it every day. So they actually wrote to UNESCO in Manx and said, no, it's not extinct. And subsequently, then UNESCO changed their rating to severely endangered, I think. I'm going to skip this video because of time. But just the one thing to say here is that currently most of the estimates that I've seen say there's about 2,000 speakers of Manx now. Again, you know, I don't know, take that with a grain of salt. Does that mean people that can read some of it, people that actually speak it on a daily basis? That I'm not sure of. We do have an expert here in the audience who is my teacher. And if you have more questions later about that, he has a wealth of information if you find him later. His name is Paul. But so,
We had a
right, so let's go back to our chart now, comparing. And as we said, I think the schools and the government support in this case were paramount in helping to revive Manx. And also, I think the people on the Isle of Man have a strong identity with the culture, and they really want to carry on the culture and identity as long as they can. Okay. Great. Now the fun part. The fun part for me. I hope you guys too. I like grammar. I like seeing how languages are different from each other. So I'm going to go through these aspects of Manx grammar so that you can get a taste of what Manx is like. First of all, Manx is a verb, subject, object language. Let's see, the most common word ordering is subject, object, verb, which is 41%. The second common is subject, verb, object, which is 35%. And only about 7% of the languages are verb, subject, object in the world. What does that mean? Well, the verb comes first, and then the subject, and then the object. So here we have some examples. Tamiski, ta is the auxiliary verb, me is I, and tired is ski. So to say I am tired, you say tamiski. To say the farmer went or did go to the field, you say ren en erenach goldisavar. You put the auxiliary verb first. And this is not a question, even though the transliteration of it says, did the farmer go to the field? It's just that the verb is in the first place always. Another one with the preterite tense, Honika dunya ervada. They saw a man on the boat. We're literally saying, saw they a man on the boat. Second interesting thing that I learned, or one of the interesting things, was that Manx has initial consonant mutations like all the other Celtic languages. What does that mean? Well, the initial sounds of words will change based on the context that they're in grammatically, actually. There are two types of changes, the lenition changing, which is like a softening of the sound. And so, for example, stops get turned into fricatives. And then there's a nasal, it's called nasalization, which is a strengthening of the sound. Voiceless consonants are going to get voiced, and voiced consonants become nasal. So you can see the lenition, for example, of T. T become H, but if it's nasalized, it becomes D, which is not a nasal, but it's just the strengthening process. The D actually becomes Nya in nasalization. Here are some examples, right? This happens in many different contexts in the language. It's fun. It's fun to learn. No, it's very complicated, but it is fun, and you just have to practice. You know, as you practice the language more, you get used to it. But so, for example, the word peach means person. If you say two people, it's da feach. Let's see. Moor is big. Wyniag voor would be a big window. Let's see. How about tost means silent. If you want to use the stative verbs construction, if you want to say we are silent, taschen and dost, the T gets nasalized. Another one, goal, in this case, another nasalization in a perfect tense. You would say tamier njol, this is pronounced njol. So that's a strengthening of the g sound to a nasal. Okay, so despite the mutations, one easy thing about Manx that I like is for any verb tense, you can use a periphrastic tense. So once you know how these are made, you don't have to learn a bunch of complicated conjugations for the verbs. You just use, you just use the helping verbs with the verbal noun. So in the present, you say tammy clay, past vummy clay, future beam clay, conditional vein clay, perfect tammy clay, pluperfect vummy clay. And then you can also have periphrastic with the verb to do. So that's more of a sort of a completed form. So a renmi clay, I played. In English, we could translate it as I did play. So it's more of a completed form, whereas these are continuous. I will play, future. You're actually saying I will do playing, or I will, I will play as an instance, not a process. Yinin play, I would play, and imperative, jin play, which is like do playing, play. We've seen a little bit of this. Let's see. There are two forms of each verb in Manx. So you have an independent form and a dependent form. The independents are used in positive statements, and the dependents are pretty much used everywhere else. So here's some examples with the auxiliary verb ve. So for the positive statement, taschen gol, that's we are going. But the question is, welchen gol, are we going? And then you use the vel or the nel form here in all the other instances. Chanel shingol, we are not going. Nachvel shingol, aren't we going? And in subordinating clauses is clauses erliam de vel shingol. I reckon that we were going erinor de vel shingol because we were going chanel fisem de vel shingol. I don't know whether we're going. Another fun thing, prepositions inflect in Celtic languages, similar to, I think, Arabic as well. These two I picked because they are used a lot in idiomatic expressions, so I thought we'd go over those. So the preposition at is ek, but if you want to say at me, you say em, at you is ed, at him is ege, at her is ek, at us is ein, at you plural is eu, at them is ok. Same with which is on. On me is orm, on you is ort, on him is on her is uri, orin, or eru, and oru, etc. The numbers. Okay, this is hard. It's fascinating. So there's a traditional vigesimal system of numbers in Manx. So what does that mean? You've got the 20s, so you have feed is 20, daid is 2 20s, da feed. 3 feed is 60, care feed is 80. It's like our old way of saying 20s in English, score, if you've ever heard score, like 7 years ago, which is the famous Gettysburg Address. So score is a count of 20. So you learn your numbers from 1 to 20, and then you build the higher numbers on top of those. So for example, 24, Kiaras feed, you're actually saying 4 and 20. Now, the other tricky part of it is, if you use this with a noun, you put the noun after the first number element. right? So it's not it's like it's already complicated, it just makes it more complicated. So 24 cars, you're going to say, Kier gleisten in as feed, which is 4 cars and 20, right? 57 is Shach Jegas Daid, which is 17 and 40. 57 houses, there would be Shach Tayin Jegas feed, which is 7 houses, 10 and 2 score. 78 would be 3 feet as Chachjeg, 3 score and 18. If you add a noun in there, 78 trees, 3 billion feet as Chachjeg, 3 trees score and 18. So when teaching kids math in school, they actually have created a decimal system based on Irish decimal system, so they could actually do their math, because I can't imagine learning math with these numbers. Okay, the last thing is that there's no single word for yes and no. So basically you repeat the auxiliary verb from the question, right? So if someone asks, so Veluski, are you tired? You would either say ta, yes, which is the auxiliary verb, literally meaning am, is, or are. Or chanel, no, which is not am, or is, or are. Was he sick? Raweching, you would answer va, which is the auxiliary verb in the past. You're literally saying was. Or harau, not was. Renu goldis dulish, did you go to Douglas? Ren, did. Haren, not did. Jachad port hinsche, did they go in the preterite tense to Peel? Hi is the answer, which is the preterite of went. Or hajach, no, not went. Okay, final thoughts, back to the language revival. Consider learning a dying or revived language. Who better to learn these languages than seasoned polyglots who are good language learners? I think also many of you are maybe language teachers, so you could maybe help contribute to communities who need language learning resources, for example. How would you pick a dying language that you would want to learn? Well, here's some ideas. Pick a struggling language where you live. Maybe choose a language that your family spoke once and that you don't speak anymore. Pick a language where you would like to travel, like Hawaii. A language where you work, a language related to one that you already know, or a language that is completely different from any you have ever learned. In my case, I know the question comes up because everybody always asks me the question, why did you learn Manx? And in my case, it was I had an ancestral connection to the Isle of Man, so I did some family history research, and I discovered that one of my great-great-great-grandmothers here, Roseanne Quine, she was born in 1800 on the Isle of Man, and all of her ancestors before her were born on the Isle of Man. So I have an ancestral connection to Manx, and that's why it was on my list. Okay, so hopefully we have enough time. We're going to play a game about cognates. Now, cognates are words in 2 different languages that have descended from a common mother language. Sometimes you can see the connections between the cognates, and sometimes you can't. Since English and Manx are both descended from Proto-Indo-European, they're quite distant, but they do have cognates. And so I think it's fun to try to identify them. Here's an example of cognates, which I found was fascinating. So there are 2 verbs in Manx. One is the copula, and it's in Manx, it comes out as she or s, and that is actually cognate with the s in the verb is, or the other forms in all the other Indo-European languages that have ist, est, or any s in the 3rd person singular form of the copula verb. Manx auxiliary is actually coming from the verb in cognate. It's with English is stand, the T in there. In Manx it's ta, and that's cognate with forms like stare, estar in Spanish, that Italian. So when you say ta juan lai, or le, ta juan le, that means is, Juan reading, he's reading. You can see it's actually very similar. Juan está leyendo, Giovanni está leyendo. So I thought that was fascinating. Okay, so let's jump to the game. Your job is to just look at the words that I'm showing you on the screen and pick one. You'll have 15 seconds for each. If you want to go to kahoot.it, you can do that. And I will start the game. So the pin should come up in just a second. There's the pin if you want to join in. It's on full screen. Pin? I don't know. Pin in Manx. Erwin persuna. All right, we got a lot of players here. All right, is that it? That's all this, oh, one more, couple more. Okay. No, we still got some more players. Getting up to how many? 36. Yes. No, I don't have. I'll buy you beer. Okay, so I'm going to start this now. Okay, there we go. So the first 5 words are body parts. I'll give you, that's the hint. And the last 3 are related to food. All right, the first one is ingen. Ingen. The responses are pinky, ankle, finger, or nail, like as a finger or toenail. You have 10 more seconds. Ingen is a nail. We did not get that too well. 21 said it was finger. And who's at the top? Micher is at the top. So ingen means nail. The derivation through Old Irish, ingen, Proto-Celtic, anguina, Proto-Indo-European, hanoch. I don't know how these words are pronounced. There's a derived form, hanaglos, which gives us naglas in Proto-Germanic, nagel in Proto-West Germanic, nagel in English, and nail in modern English. All right, the next one. Ger. Is ger a tear, an ear, hair, or jaw? And you're really just guessing, like, right? So don't feel bad if you don't get it. I didn't give you any overview of the sound changes in Celtic languages. 18 said it was ear. Oh, I'm winning so far this game. The answer is tear. Let's see how the Quetzalcoatl is up at the top now. Ger means tear. Old Irish, der. From Proto-Celtic, der, dakrom. From Proto-Indo-European, dakru. Going into Proto-Germanic, tahran. Proto-West Germanic, tahar. Old English, tear. And English, tear. Next one. Chenga. Chenga. Chin, tongue, jaw, or shin. Chenga. 4 more seconds. Tongue, yay, we got a lot of tongues here. Good. I have to hit next. There we go. How did the leaderboard? Victoria is at the leaderboard now. Tongue, chenga, from Old Irish, tenge, Proto-Celtic, tangas, Proto-Indo-European, denguas, down into Germanic as tungo, into Proto-West Germanic as tunga, English, Old English, tunga, and English, tongue. Next one, kri. Kri, is it knee, hair, heart, or toe? Heart. Yeah, you're getting better. 22 said heart. Awesome. How did the board change? Victoria's still at the top. Cree is heart. And actually, it kind of looks like the Romance, cur cordis cuore, a little bit. From Old Irish, crida, Proto-Celtic, cridom, Proto-Indo-European, cer, giving us Proto-Germanic, herto, herte, heart. The next one is bulk. This is our last body part. Bulk. Is it belly, leg, mole, or follicle? Belly, yay, we're getting better. 17 said belly, and that's what it is. Let's see, Walter just jumped to the top. Bulk, belly, from Old Irish bulk, Proto-Celtic bulgos, Proto-Indo-European belk, into Proto-Germanic balges, Old English belk, Middle English belly, Modern English belly. Next one is a food-related word. Food-related word. Is it seal, salt, shell, or soul? Yeah, that was an easy one. Awesome. You guys are getting pros. Who's at the top? Walter is still at the top. Yes, Solon, it's similar, sal, sel, sale in Latin languages. Right, so next one, food-related. Ool. Is it oil, full, veal, or apple? Three seconds. Oh, wow, I really got you there. It is apple. Now, it's funny because the word for oil is one of the words that you learn when you're learning Manx. It's very similar. Ool is apple, but ul is oil. So there's a lesson for you, too. Who's at the top? Walter is still at the top. And there's the derivation from Old Irish, uval, abul, Proto-Celtic, hebel, and Proto-Indo-European, going to aplas and apelu and apple in English and Old English. Okay, last one, yeast. It's pronounced yeast. Is it feast, yeast, fish, or waste? 6 seconds. $16, fish, very good. It is fish, indeed. Old Irish, iask, feskos in Proto-Celtic, and Proto-Indo-European pesk, like Romance, pisces, Latin, down into fiskas in Germanic, fisk and fish. And that's it. Let's see who won, who's at the top, or who's in third place. Victoria. Anna, second place. And Walter, congratulations. See me later for your beer. And I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Gurmayu son gleishtach rish leichtem michionigel kvanenach. And if you see my flag on my name tag or name tags, the GV comes from Gelk Vanenach. Okay, time for questions. What's the level of mutual intelligibility between Manx, Irish, and Scottish Gaelic, and what about Brittonic languages? Paul can answer that, but I do know that Yeah, I think there's, especially with Manx and Irish that's spoken in Northern Ireland, so the dialects that are closer to the Isle of Man, there's some mutual intelligibility. And I think also with Scottish Gaelic, any comments on that?
Hello. When spoken, there's a lot of mutual intelligibility between, especially, as Jeffrey said, Northern Irish, Manx and Scottish Gaelic. But Manx, if any of you know any Irish or Scottish, you'll have noticed that Manx doesn't look anything like the other two Gaelic languages. So written, they're quite distinct, but when you hear the sounds, you can have a conversation quite happily about simple things with Irish and Scottish people. Especially if you have a drink as well, that helps the
Yes, it
mutual
would.
intelligibility.
Okay, number 2. Man, Hawaii, Cornwall have also English as official language. Is revitalization possible because families know that the pupils will be fluent in English anyway? Well, that's a good question. I think, yeah, well, we will always use English, and in these places where if English is official language, I think they will continue. There's not a fear that it would be replaced by a revived language that could influence it in some way. Yes, I think so. Next one, are there families who speak Manx at home? I want to say yes, but Paul might have an opinion on that.
Yes, there are, especially families who might have one parent who speaks quite well and will speak to the child. I don't think there are any families who use exclusively Manx, but there are definitely more families with one parent at least who speaks some Manx, or both might use a bit. You will hear Manx spoken by the parents at the school gate of the Manx school quite often, so that's a good improvement.
Great, thank you. How authentic are pronunciation and accent considering the last natives died 50 years ago? That's a really good question. People who are learning languages as second languages as adults, have trouble with pronunciation, right? If you're a polyglot, you might be able to do better with it. So there are a lot of people that speak Manx and they speak it with an English accent. But there are others who are very conscious about trying to reproduce the sound, and they go back to the recordings and they listen, how did the native speakers actually speak? Let's see, what do you feel is the biggest, most consistent factor to kick off opposition of speakers of a declining language against the takeover of English? Ooh, that's deep. Biggest, most consistent factor to kick off opposition. Oh, I'm going to have to think about that. Like off the top of my head, I don't think I can answer that question, but I'll think about that. And if you pose that question, come see me later and we can talk about that. How long did it take you to learn the language? Did you start speaking Manx from the beginning, or how long after you started? Okay, so I speak at a less than A1 level right now. I've been learning for a year. I've been taking a lesson every week with Paul. I've got a long ways to go. There was a certain point where I was like, oh yeah, I'm kind of getting this. I'm like getting the feel, like you kind of get the rhythm of it. You get the feel for, you put the verb first, and then you know how to use the definite article, for example. But I still have to learn a lot of vocabulary, and I need a lot of practice.
He's been very modest. He does speak well.
Well, thank you. Good mind. So what do you feel is the biggest, most consistent factor? Oh wait, I saw that one. What made you want to learn Manx, and how did you learn about its existence? Right, so as I showed in the one slide, I had family history from the Isle of Man, so that's what made me want to learn it. I knew about it. I just Googled for Manx language classes, and I got in touch with people that got me in touch with Paul. Is the spelling based on English spelling? Yes, exactly. You have these double E's, which are pronounced E, and double O's, which are pronounced oo. Very heavily influenced by English spelling. I have not been to the Isle of Man. The next question, does Manx have declension? Not really, no. There are some genitive forms, right? But
yeah, it used to. Old Irish had declension. Manx has, like you say, genitive forms and a few fossilized dative forms. And there's a mutation in the vocative. So if you were talking to Jeffrey, you could say, hey, Jeffrey, if you wanted to. But yeah.
Where can I learn Manx? Talk to Paul. I do it online, so you can do it anywhere in the world. I should probably stop the questions here. One more. You mentioned that laws are spoken every year during some festival. What kind of laws? Is it some cultural declaration? Right, so these would be the laws on the Isle of Man. Isle of Man is self-governing, so their assembly, you know, they decide on the laws that they want to have on the island, and those are the laws, I think. Is that right?
That's correct, and it's generally just I think it's new laws, and it's just like a short description. It's not the whole law, it's just like a sentence in English and Manx, but that's been the tradition to just announce the new laws bilingually for hundreds of years.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. If you asked a question and I didn't answer it, please feel free to come see me anytime during the rest of the gathering. And thank you.